Yeah, let's go ahead and show people the magic. Hello and welcome to DIY 101, self-publishing for beginners. Hello, I am Norman Rafferty. I work for Sanguine Productions. I have worked with them since 1997, since their founding. Since then, we have had 17 successful crowdfundings. Some of them on platforms that don't even exist anymore, like Fundable. We were doing crowdfunding before crowdfunding was cool. I am joined by the disembodied voice today of Griffin Varp.
Hello, everybody. I'll be here ready to relay questions throughout the ceremony.
Yes, we will also be able to share some of the links. Sometimes the links will be showing up. This presentation is normally designed to be viewed in a large environment, which is the large type. Normally I go around tours, but apparently there is a horrible pandemic going on. So I'm speaking to you from the comfort of my vestibule. So we'll go ahead and share the QR codes. Also, we're willing to answer questions I'll pause during certain points. Go ahead and ask questions, and Griffin will go ahead and field some of those, and we can share some of the links with you. Okay, so let's see. This is all for you, Ivy. So if you have any questions to ask us, just let us know. And I'll try to keep in mind there's a delay. So I'm assuming that you've come here today to self-publishing for beginners because you want to go ahead and make something. It could be we here at Sanguine, or I, Norman Rafferty, have had experience in almost every field related to making something by yourself, making a comic book, making a video game, making a boxed game. Mostly what we do at Sanguine is we make tabletop role-playing games. We also made a card game called Horror Stories. We've made all sorts of things. We've learned a lot of things along the way. And also I need to emphasize that things are constantly changing. I learned new things this week. But a lot of things have also stayed the same. So we're going to go ahead and advise folks that whatever you do, you need to go ahead and be smart about things. That's it. That's pretty much the whole thing. Any questions? All six of us are trying our best. Thanks. Okay, yeah, that joke usually goes better when you actually have a room. But our bit of advice here is whenever you're going to go ahead and do anything, but mostly a self-publishing part, we're going to try to break everything down into 5 early steps, and then we can go ahead and do it. Before we do anything, we need to answer 5 questions about what the crummy heck it is we're going to do. We need to decide the specific thing we're going to make, board game, card game, video game, whatever. That's not too hard. We need to go ahead and make sure we know how much we're going to make. We need to have a measurable goal. And after we've chosen our measurable goal, we need to make sure it's a goal we can actually meet. Is this something we can, is actionable? Do we have the skills and resources to do this? If we don't have it, can we get somebody else who has the skills to go ahead and do it? We also need to make sure that we're going to go ahead and treat everybody right when we do it. There are right ways and there are wrong ways, and you can also set yourself up for, to really let people down without necessarily knowing about it. I have a lot of horror stories I could tell, but today we want to be kind of positive. So we're going to talk about making sure everybody gets the credit and the recompense that they deserve. And of course, the most important thing all about this is to make sure that it actually comes out. So we need to make sure that we have timetables. A lot of time when I run into people who want to make some sort of story, they're saying, well, I've been polishing the characters for about 20 years now, and I decided the sidereal day of their home world is about 235 hours. Look, eventually you have to actually make this. We have a very narrow time period right now in 2020 when it is easiest to get your stuff out, but we need to make sure we go ahead and make it. And for that, we need to pick deadlines. So that's basically the entire thing. We're going to go ahead and talk through the 5 steps to deciding what all of these things are, so we can take a vague project like let's make a game and turn it into, we're going to make a video game. It's going to be 8 hours long. It's going to have sprites in it. We're going to hire some people with contracts, and it's going to come out on August 1st. Okay. Our presentation was designed that I know folks might not be able to stay for the full 2 hours, so I've gone ahead and split this up into 2 parts. We originally hosted an Origins Online in 2 different parts. but I'll be taking breaks during the different parts of this to go ahead and answer some questions. So I think the chat's been pretty quiet so far. Isn't that right, Griffin?
That's right. I think they're all paying rapt attention to your wonderful voice.
Okay. I might go a little fast. I don't have a lot of visual cues. Normally we do a lot of personal question answering, but I appreciate you working with us for the 21st century. That's how old I am. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the first parts here about going ahead and setting up our project. I'm assuming that most of you already have a specific thing in mind that you want to make. Like you want to make a tabletop role-playing game or you want to make a video game. So that's not really, you know, this is usually the simplest part about that. I just want to get this out of the way because we might drop this word a little bit later. What you're actually making is something that's going to belong to someone. You're going to make something called intellectual property. For example, if you sit down and you make the Aura Battler Tylenol game, Aura Battler Tylenol becomes an intellectual property or an IP. And someone has to sort of own that. Most of you, if you're doing the company by yourself, you'll be the owner of that. But you don't necessarily have to be. I mean, it could be something that you create in-house, but these days you can actually go ahead and pay money or get in an open gaming license with other people. Like the big one is Dungeons and Dragons. You can go ahead and get the D&D compatible commercial license, the current version of the open gaming license, and actually make a product that uses D&D's intellectual property. You technically don't own it, but this has the advantage that there's a lot of people who often enjoy these sorts of things, like D&D or Fate or some of those other aspects. There are pros and cons to both of these. The con is that you don't necessarily own it when you're done, and you might be beholden to certain clauses or restrictions. Dungeons and Dragons does have a morality clause that says you can't do certain things with their product. But like I said, also is the pro that people may have heard of it. Also, if you're licensing, you may be able to, excuse me a moment here, a little dried out there. You might also be able to use other resources related to it. For example, the My Little Pony game is not made in-house by Hasbro, which is weird. Hasbro makes Dungeons and Dragons, they make board games. No, a third party licensed My Little Pony and made the tabletop game. Now, I'm assuming they had rules about like what they were allowed to include because it's a kid's game, but a small company called up a billion-dollar toy company and is going ahead making a game tie-in. So sky's the limit. You know, if you want to make like, you know, I don't know, Star Trek might be an example of that, but yeah, you can just call these companies and ask. They'll often be very nice to talk to you and have terms, just understanding that, you know, there might be strings attached. A lesser version of that kind of licensing is if you just want to go ahead and make something that's whatever the popular du jour. I think these concepts here are already kind of dated because zombies are still kind of out of the blue, are kind of passe. Cthulhu seems to never go out of style. These kinds of products are pretty good, but I will emphasize that when we talk about timetabling, if you're trying to make something that seizes upon some sort of popular fad or viral meme that's going around, you need to be fast. You need to get in and get out because these things often do not have a very high shelf life. And of course, one thing that's also very popular these days is you might find an older product that either you made or someone else made, and you want to go ahead and make a deluxe edition of it. Maybe update the graphics or squeeze it into a DOS box so it can go ahead and run on modern systems. That's what GOG does. Often you can get the rights to some of these older products pretty good and go ahead and update those. Whatever it is, you need to decide, you know, what it is you're going to go ahead and make, and we'll get to the contract part later in responsible. One thing that you're going to be very concerned about is your market. I'm assuming that you came here because you want to make something and you have something that you're very passionate about. And usually what you're making, you're very passionate about because it's either something that's old that you want to bring back, you want to update or license something like some older video game no one's heard of, or you want to make something that speaks to you, something that isn't already out there. If you're like that, like me, who wants to make stuff that you haven't seen out there, you're probably going to have a smaller market share when you do it. So a lot of what you're going to see people doing on their Kickstarters is a lot of things that we like to call a premium type product. It's going to sell for a lot of money. It's going to have a price point of $40, $60, or $80 or more. And it's not going to sell a lot of copies because only a few people are going to be interested in reading comic books that repurpose Victorian woodcuts or whatever it is that interests you. So a lot of you are going to be aiming in the premium category. Sometimes if you're lucky, you can go ahead and push into the economy category. If you're licensing something, or if it's a Dungeons and Dragons product or something else that's really popular, you might be able to sell it at a lower price point and make less money on each one, a lower margin on each one, because you're expecting to sell a lot more in volume because you're expecting to be very popular. You can also do things like cutting corners. Instead of doing full color glossy pictures, you might do black and white or use clip art. Instead of doing a deluxe video game with a cartridge release, I don't know why you would do that, you probably wind up releasing it on a digital service with a lot smaller stuff, maybe solo play rather than network play, which is more resources, etc. In other words, something that's a little lower end, like you see in a lot of the indie video games, but also doesn't cost a lot, and then has a lower price point so more people can buy it. There are pros and cons to both of these approaches. But the important thing I want to emphasize here is that you will probably be in one of those categories. Either you're going to be making a few of them, but selling them for a lot of money to make up for the fact that few people are going to buy it, or you're making something that is going to be done very inexpensively with very low risk because you're expecting a lot of people to buy it, like a Dungeons and Dragons module, something like that. It's when you get in the middle range that you'll start to get in trouble. If you try to make something that's really, really, really nice, but you also don't want to charge a lot of money for it, that middle range is where you're going to run into stuff that becomes expensive but high margin. Expensive but low margin. In other words, it costs a lot of money and you don't make a lot in the sales. And that's where the danger zone is going to be. So we're going to see that in a little bit. Okay, so quick question here. Would family style board games be more successful in the economy category and vice versa? So that's a problem. Family style games, when people sit down to play them with kids, the pieces have to be usually relatively robust. They have to be plastic or wooden, high quality. They're not going to stand for little cardboard cutouts. And often they're expecting colorful stuff. And also, if you make a family friendly game, you're going to compete in the $20 to $30 box category with those games. So they're going to expect your product to be pretty nice looking. They're usually willing to spend more money on a game if it looks nice. Like you may have noticed that a lot of board games that come out, a lot of the ones on Kickstarter are in the $40 to $60 to $80 category because they're really nice. You can still make a family-friendly game, and we'll talk about that a bit more with the time scheduling, but it's going to be a lot trickier. I honestly would tell folks that if your first product, either try to make something that's pretty cheap and then maybe do it again with a deluxe edition later, just so you can figure this out. Okay, and remind me again, Percival, later, and we'll go ahead and talk a little bit more about that when we get to budgeting. In fact, this also dovetails very nicely in this next question of exactly what is the physical presentation of your product. A family board game would be something that would be put in a box and sent to people. The physical productions we're mostly worried about are either mass production or print on demand. Today, we live in a very good era for print on demand. It's very easy for someone who wants to make a tabletop role-playing game or other kind of fiction book to set the book up digitally, and then it exists digitally, and when people order it, the company prints and binds the book as soon as they order it on demand. Print-on-demand books are more expensive than mass printing books, and they often can't really match the quality. Some, like you may notice that if you go to order something on Drive-Thru RPG, the black and white version is $20 and the full color version is $80. And when it shows up, it's not going to be on very nice glossy paper because as much as I love the Lightning Source network and Lulu who does these things, print-on-demand printers just aren't as nice right now as the full mass printing glossy ones. So mass printing would have a big advantage for economy of scale. If you're a tabletop person who's making a box game, I mean, I don't know if any of you remember, I'd ask you to show hands, but if you remember cheap ass games, which is kind of still around. They used to make really like low production cost games, but you may have noticed that lately they're all big $60 box games. You can still make a family friendly game, but I think you'd really be aiming for the premium market. You'd really have to go ahead and get some of the nicer product parts. But that's why you'd be doing a crowdfunding, because you want to get that economy of scale. You want to go ahead and do a mass printing, and you can't do these as like 1, 2, 3 books at a time. You need to hire good artists and get a lot of parts together. So your crowdfunding, you're going to set that really high. And of course, there's electronic distribution. Some of you may be Twitch Prime members, which makes me think you might be Amazon Prime members. It is now a golden age for sending stuff digitally. Stuff like Prime allows people to basically read stuff for, I want to say free. They're paying a rental fee per month, so they're motivated to get as many copies as possible. Plus also from a game, I gotta say from a game design perspective, itch.io, Steam, some of these other guys, it's so easy to get your game up and where people can actually like give you money and then get a copy of the game that works, which is beautiful from your perspective. All the methods before this era were terrible. Like when you hear about they discovered some legacy video game that was never released, that's almost always because it would have been too expensive to produce. It's no longer true. So if you can make your game be distributed or your product electronically, that is going to be way in your favor. Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you're asking about boxing. We have a lot more stuff we could talk about boxed. So, okay. So now
we do have one more question if you want to answer that.
Oh, sure. Well, I missed it. What is it?
Do you have advice for price discrimination in order to access the higher end of the market, specifically for tabletop RPGs in this case?
Okay. Yeah. When we talk about budgeting it a little bit, I'm not sure. Yeah, when you're asking about whether it's going to be premium or economy, like how much should we charge? I'm going to talk about budgeting in a little bit, so I want to put a pin in that. So remind me when we get to the budgeting part of the show to address that, because that's a good question. In fact, related to the economy of scale, like I've just gone ahead and mentioned here, how many units are we going to sell? I mean, as much as I love these small indie stuff, the question is how big your market's going to be. Now, some of you may have worked retail before. I mean, Griffin, have you worked retail?
I did cashier stand for a little bit.
Ah, right. So you probably heard the phrase when they say 80% of your grief comes from 20% of the people walking your store, right?
Unfortunately, I haven't.
Oh.
Though I did hear a game design principle similar to that of like, well, 80% of people won't really do the thing, but 20% will figure it out immediately and stuff like that. Principle similar to that.
Pareto principle is a general rule, and I'm glad somebody asked me about how to price the stuff, because we'll talk about that, about premium versus economy right now. Basically, the gist of this is that 80% of your business is going to come from 20% of your customers. This is a vague rule, but it's why you see so many different pricing points for video games, where they have the collector's edition that's $200 and also the basic edition for $60. It's like you ask yourself, well, who buys a $200 one? And the answer is about 1/5 of the people who show up or less. But it's a premium product that costs way more. So we're expecting folks to go ahead and pay for that. We don't expect a lot of people to buy it, but we're going to charge a lot of money because only a few people are going to buy it. That's going to come up again. If only a few people are going to buy it, we need to make sure that we're covering all of our expenses. Pareto principle is a kind of a vague guideline here, but one thing that's beautiful about crowdfunding, well, we'll get to what's beautiful about crowdfunding here in a bit, but when you ask me at the price point, obviously, since you're going to have those two kinds of customers, it's going to be a good idea if you can reach both of them. So because a crowdfunding is going to let you have multiple rewards, it's a good idea to have at least one reward that's just the basic product. Like if you go to my Kickstarters, like one reward, $20, the game, digitally, done. It's very basic, very low end, just get the game. The other ones is we'll have upsells. We like to do cameos where people can, if you pay us extra money, we'll ask one of the artists to draw a specific character for you. That's a bigger hassle on us, and we have to work with the artist, but we're willing to do it. I mean, it's just if you want to pay us a little more money, we can go ahead and do that. Or we'll often sell much more of our library. One very popular buy that's good for us is because we have dozens of games, we can sell multiple games. Often you'll see this with, if it's your first time crowdfunding, a lot of people will offer like fancy dice or other kinds of upsells. My advice is try to keep that a little more limited. It's usually a good idea to have one that's just the basic and then one that's an upsell that something is actionable and responsible for you, which we'll talk about a bit more. Looks like we got more messages. No, we're good. Okay. We're good so far, Griffin?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, one issue that you're going to have to worry about when you make your product, the reason why we have to answer the question, how many we're going to sell, is because you're going to have to spend money to make money. On your product, there's going to be things called the fixed costs, which is money you have to spend. If you want to be on Steam, that's $100. If you want to have artwork on your boxed game, you either draw it yourself or pay someone a couple $1,000s to draw the art and counter for you. That's a fixed cost because it doesn't matter how many units you sell. Once you pay the setup fee or the art fee, the more units you make, that stays the same. Per unit costs are things that go up per unit. Like if you're making a box game, you have to put all the tokens in it in the box, seal that up. And the more of those you move, the more those costs go up. That's where you're benefiting from economy of scale. The reason why you want to do a crowdfunding for that sort of thing is because the more money you can get in advance, the bigger you can make those print runs, and the more you can make, more you can shrink those fixed costs. Because you can see here, if you only made 100 copies of a board game, your fixed cost would be very large. But if you can get up to 10,000, you already paid for the artwork and the setup, and you already play tested the rules. If you can get a pre-order run of 10,000, you can go ahead and do a much larger run, not have to pay to have each one of those set up and shipped and customs fees and all those relations and that sort of stuff, and minimize that cost. Okay. I think we're still pretty good. All right. Okay, so now that we've talked about, we know what we're going to make, and we know it's going to cost money. Now we're getting pretty close to what we need for our budget. Now notice I did a less than or equal to thing here. After we figured out how much it's going to cost to get the art or get the parts here, and then after we go ahead and we call some people and get bids, we can go ahead and call several different companies. Normally when I do this, we're actually on tour at Gen Con's wonderful indie cascade, where you can meet people like Pacific Digital and a lot of other nice printers, and they'll talk to you directly about getting bids. That's a little bigger than we can do right here, but you can start talking to companies about getting bids on how much it would cost. And they'll tell you, okay, if you print 1,000 cards, it's going to cost $10,000. If you print 2,000 cards, it's going to cost $15,000, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we know how much it costs to make this number of units, and I know how much it's going to cost to get this art and that sort of thing. Now we're ready to go ahead and start making our budget. Okay, one thing that we're going to talk about when we go ahead and plan for the budget is we need to make sure that we're not losing money on the deal. There's been more than one Kickstarter where when they set it up, they said, okay, I should probably charge about maybe $20 per game since it cost me about $20 to make. And what they weren't thinking of is there were distribution costs, there were mailing costs, there was insurance costs. Sometimes stuff gets lost in the mail and you have to resupply it. There are crowdfunder costs. There are all sorts of costs that are per unit that get added on. So you can wander a situation where if you planned your fixed cost okay, but you forgot that the per unit on these, you might actually have set it too low. You might actually be losing money on each sale. Like if it's costing you $21 to mail out a product you sold for $20, then the more you actually sold in the crowdfunding, the more money you would lose. That's happened to quite a few of them. Also, we live in a terrible world where shipping costs are changing all the time. As I'm talking right now, the post office is actually in flux. So a lot of folks forget to go ahead and add shipping costs. So we need to make sure that we do our budget, you put those costs in there, and then we make sure we need to always put a little more on top of that in case something goes wrong or we don't know. That's why I always recommend you should put a maximum on your rewards. When you set up with Indiegogo or Kickstarter, they will let you set a cap. on any sort of reward. Uh, Set it to some arbitrary number like 10,000. You can always raise it later. They'll let you raise it later. But like if you're doing custom rewards, there's somebody I really like, Rich Berlew. Griffin, have you ever read Order of the Stick by Rich Berlew?
Yes, I have. I've been following it since I was in high school, honestly.
Do you remember his Kickstarter?
Uh, I think I remember it popping up sometime in the first several hundred episodes. I didn't have money at the time, of course.
Okay, well, he had a Kickstarter to go ahead and produce print books, and one of the rewards he had was, oh, and for like an extra $20, I'll throw in an autograph. Hey, he didn't put a cap on it. So I think there was something like 5,000 of these.
Yes, he got a hand injury from that, I think.
Yes, I'm sorry that he got a hand injury. I remember I checked in like 2 years ago and he still wasn't done shipping them all. You know, infinity is a dangerous number. I know the infinity oregano meme was going around for a while. Anything that's going to be premium, you can always add more later. Speaking of other sorts of rewards that you'll add for extras, often you'll see tabletop games that are offering custom dice or play mats or jackets or that sort of thing. I'm going to say that this is your first Kickstarter. I'm going to recommend don't feel like you have to throw in with a lot of that stuff. Anything you do that is a little more premium, like working with fancy dice or other items that you're not necessarily familiar with, is another problem that can crop up. And if anything goes wrong with it, if you do a crowdfunding and get all of your money because you promised you would do it, and then something goes wrong later that means you have to scrap everything and go from scratch or spend some more money to fix it, you're kind of on the hook for these really expensive rewards. I know there's been more than one Kickstarter that we've crowdfunded that says, sorry guys, it's 2 years late because we never got the custom dice that we said we would put in it, or something like that. So those can be kind of nice, but unless you're working with something you're familiar with or somebody who knows what they're doing, don't feel like you have to do those things. As nice as it is to have both an economy reward and a premium reward, the important thing is to deliver on the product. So don't feel like you have to do all those really expensive die-cast metal pieces and injection mold stuff. They're way more complicated, and if they're outside your skill set and you don't know them, it's better to go with what you know. Okay. All right, still a lot of questions. See some new people. Once again, folks, we are... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. Well, you did finish up with the budget section, so we do still have Ivy's question if you want to go to that. Pricing discrimination to access higher-end markets for tabletop RPGs.
Oh, well, I've talked a little bit about that. No, we're not at the budgeting section yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. That felt like it. My bad.
Oh, no, there's so much to talk about. How are we doing on time? I can't see a clock.
Currently we've been going 30 minutes, and
perfect.
We're good.
It's like I've done this before. Okay, so speaking of what I just mentioned now, don't feel like you have to do those rewards. Once again, we have to decide how we're going to go ahead and get this stuff done. I'm assuming that most of you are first timers. Maybe you've designed a game before, a couple, and you're taking the self-publishing plunge for the first time. And I'm assuming that you have at least some of the skills involved to do this. You can write rules, write code. Maybe you know someone who can draw. So to get stuff comes from two different places. Either comes from inside your house where you make it, or other people who are part of your liability corporation make it. I'm guessing most of you are single operators, so it's just you. But a lot of the stuff you might actually have to go ahead and pay money for someone else to do it. If you want a really nice box art cover that you see on those family-friendly games, you're going to go ahead and hire somebody who can do artwork like that. Okay? The part about that is you are going to have to pay any freelancers something up front. You know the joke, people don't like to get paid in exposure. And to be honest, no one is going to do that for you. No one is going to work for free. The best you could probably do is Fiverr. And even then, you want to hire a professional because you need to make sure that the rights of anything that the freelancers do transfer to you. This is where I was talking about some intellectual property. Later, when we talk about being responsible, we'll talk about having contracts that make sure that the rights of the stuff transfer to you, and to make sure that's not something someone just downloaded off of the internet. There's been more than one case where somebody just grabbed a bunch of stuff off the internet, handed that in to the people who were paying, or offering them, exposure or whatever. And the Kickstarter people, the self-publisher published it in good faith, but then later they found out they had violated a copyright, and then it ruined everything. It ruined the project. All the money had to go back, etc. So that's what you're going to have to pay money. If you pay money with a contract for work for hire, the mere act of giving someone money seals the contract and then makes sure that you can use all the stuff and responsible about it. That said, that means you're going to have to pay some money up front if you have to hire freelancers. That's what we do when we do our Kickstarters. We hire some artists to draw art for us. You're going to have to do the same thing too. That might wind up being a couple $100. You don't necessarily have to buy a lot, but you are going to have to go ahead and get a small war chest for that. Now, some good news. I've been making games and publishing them since before crowdfunding existed. It was what we like to call a learning experience. Before then, we had to go ahead and make some kind of educated guesses on how many people would actually buy, like 1,000, 2,000, 4,000. I would then have to go ahead and buy all of those in advance. So when we made Ironclaw First Edition, we had to go ahead and get 5,000 copies made. Then I had to go get a warehouse to put them in. And then I had to hope eventually people would buy all of these before something bad happened to all of them. It was a terrible time. But you live in the glorious 21st century, and thus you have the advantage of crowdfunding. The nice part about crowdfunding is you can go ahead and ask, hey, I want to make a boxed game. How many of you would buy this? And then you'll get some people who are motivated to go ahead and pay for you in advance. And now you have some idea about how many people will buy it. Now, my slide is a lot of order here, but I mentioned the Pareto principle earlier. Actually, we'll get to the Pareto principle in a bit. The nice part is now we have some idea how much people will buy. Okay, that's why it's a little important here. Like I said, when you do a Kickstarter, you need to ask for all the money that you're going to need up front. For some reason, there's a rumor going around that says if you ask for too much money, you might not get it. Well, you want all that money because you actually want to make it, right? If you don't win your Kickstarter, don't feel bad. If the Kickstarter doesn't get all the money, hooray, you didn't make a massive flop. Imagine if you had to make this without the Kickstarter money, you would have spent a whole bunch of money out of pocket and then found out later no one wanted it. Whew. It's way better to do a Kickstarter, do a responsible budget for it, and then find out that it probably wasn't going to be profitable. Also, one thing that you need to keep in mind is a lot of you are self-publishers, so a lot of you are probably, some of you might be one and done people. Some of you might want to, I want to publish my novel and just get it out there. Okay, others might be in this for the long haul. You might be making a box game, you want to make supplements for it, or it's your role-playing game, you want people enjoying it for a long time. That's what we mean by lifetime of the product. You're going to ask yourself, how long are you going to be selling this? A lot of time you'll hear a lot of news from the video game people and that stuff that say, we need to get all of our sales in the first 2 weeks, like our blockbuster movies. Oh my God, that's got to be the first 2 weeks. After that, if it doesn't sell in the first 2 weeks, we're doomed. Okay. That's not true for you. Often you are a small indie person who no one has heard of. It's probably going to take several years for your product information to trickle upwards. We can get a crowdfunding, which will get us some publicity and that sort of thing. But odds are your product's probably going to sell low amounts over a long period of time as you become a cult classic. In this era of print on demand, of digital distribution, you really should be planning for the long haul. Don't feel bad if you don't sell a lot, but also means you need to be a little prepared that, it's not just gonna be the 30 days of Kickstarter funding. We're in this for the long haul. That's why I got some more good news for you. Earlier, I talked about the Pareto principle, which was the idea that 80% of your sales come from 20% of your customers. By that kind of logic, we can assume that the people who really love your product are the people who are willing to give you money before it even exists, the crowdfunders. They really love it. For every one of them, there's probably at least 4 other people, maybe more, who would buy your product, but would be a lot happier if it existed. That's why I said you have to plan for sort of a long haul here, because after your crowdfunding, you can expect to sell 3 or 4 times as many over the next few weeks, months, or years as more people hear about it. After the Kickstarter rewards go out, people will show it to other people. When they find out it's available for sale somewhere else or something like that, they'll go ahead and buy it. So this means that when you're doing your crowdfunding, you can often sort of plan to go ahead and sell more units over time. But as we said earlier, your hardcore fans are going to give you the early amount of money. That's probably where you're going to sell a lot of your premium stuff. If some of you are big board game fans, you may have noticed there's a lot of people who bought like the $200 box set and then farmed that off on Board Game Geek or sold that to a used game store later. Those folks, like, there'll be a lot of people who are really motivated to buy the early editions of the game. But then later, when other people want to go ahead and get the stuff, they're willing to pay for the regular version. So it's a little tricky. The offering upsells at the beginning can be, I know I said, like, don't feel like you have to do upsells, but yes, upsells are really good in the original part, because the people who are highly motivated to give you Kickstarter money and buy something that doesn't exist will also be highly motivated to buy special engraved dice and that sort of thing. All right, so that's all the parts of actually going ahead and getting the plan, deciding what we're going to do and how expensive it's going to be and what kind of parts are going to be in it. Now we have to go ahead and get to the part where we're actually planning it out. How are we doing on questions?
No new questions right now.
No other questions? Okay. I think I don't want to leave Ivy hanging, so I think we got one more thing to do about that in a bit. So let's talk a little bit about going ahead and what they like to call due diligence, which is to go ahead and make the thing. Now, one thing I mentioned here is we want to make sure that we're not hurting anybody's feelings. When you're just playing a homebrew game or showing off your fan fiction to your friends, everybody's nice and friendly. Once it turns into business where money is involved, things can get a little difficult. People who were volunteering to do something was fun. Suddenly there's a quality standard that to meet, becomes work. Also, there's money involved, so some people want pieces of it. If we go ahead and take care of a couple things in advance, I think we'll be fine. One thing I always want to remind folks about, this is the only salt we're going to do for this, okay, is that you need to be honest with everyone. Here is that phrase that I really hate. This is by Peter Molyneux, who said once in Kickstarter, if you ask for too much money up front because of the rules of Kickstarter, it's very, very hard to ask for the complete development budget. In other words, Molyneux, who famously made Goddess as a link there, said, oh, I didn't ask for enough money up front. So, because the rules of Kickstarter say I can't do that, I need to ask for a lower number. The technical definition for this is a lie. What he just said right there is absolutely false, and in fact, can be actionable for fraud. I'm seeing a lot more people who are using something called flexible funding on Indiegogo. The theory behind flexible funding on Indiegogo is that if you need $20,000 for your product, you could sign up for flexible funding, and that way, if you only get $10,000 in the crowdfunding run, Indiegogo will still charge everybody all the money and give you the $10,000 instead of $20,000 that you asked for. Okay, that is not responsible. If you needed $20,000 for your product, you asked for $20,000. If you could have done it with $10,000, you should have asked for $10,000. You're setting yourself up to fail, and Indiegogo is going to walk away from this, you know, because if you look at the text here that I copied from their website, they'll say, oh no, you could still do it. You told us you could still do it, so we believe you. You could still be on the hook for fraud. It's not those Wild West days of Double Fine anymore. There are a lot of states that have passed laws against crowdfunding fraud. But you're not going to do any of that because you're not going to do flexible funding. Not only is flexible funding not in your best interest, but Indiegogo takes a bigger cut, which messes with your budgeting. Look, I'm going to go and show everybody there's no shame in this. I said we've had 17 successful crowdfundings. This is the 18th one that wasn't successful. We let it run. It didn't make its money. And like I said, hooray. I didn't spend a lot of money, and my buddy here, Matt Howarth, didn't spend a lot of time making a product that wasn't going to sell. We looked at the numbers, we couldn't match them, we couldn't do it. Instead, what we did was we scaled the project down, found a way to do it in black and white instead of color, and scaled the numbers way down, and did it again. Sometimes people will tell you that it failed, like you'll often see people cancel a crowdfunding early or something like that for because they're worried that they have a failed crowdfunding on their list. It's going to count as a black mark. As near as I can tell, it's not even true. I've never seen anybody say, I'm not going to back you because you're another crowdfunding.
Oh, I believe you may have cut out there.
Am I back? Testing, 1, 2, 3?
Yes, you are back.
Okay, sorry. In other words, ask for all the money that you need. In fact, I'm going to advise that you're going to ask for slightly more than you need because stuff will go bad. You will have costs that you weren't expecting. Be honest and upfront about it, and then meet that goal. And if you don't meet it, one of the things I mentioned earlier is you actually are getting customer service data out of this. Our first crowdfunding, we didn't get 1,000 people saying they do the back the comic book, but we did get like 60 people say they would back it. So we had to say, well, what can we do to either appeal to more people, or can we make something that 60 people would buy and we could still do it? So you're getting valuable data by crowdfunding, and it costs you nothing. So once again, ask for all the money you need. Another thing is I want to make sure that you stay grounded. I can't tell you exactly how many you're going to sell, but you're probably not going to sell 1 million copies because no one's heard of you. So one thing to keep in mind when you're about to sell a product is it's a good idea to go on Kickstarter or Indiegogo and look for other crowdfundings that are similar to the one you already did. How much money did they get and how many units did they do? Don't just look at the stellar performers. Like, don't be comparing yourself to Blades in the Dark or 7th Sea. Those guys are anomalies who had a lot of good things going for them. Start digging around, looking at some of the other ones. We've seen a lot of crowdfundings that normally wind up in the $20,000 to $60,000 range. They get about 500 to 400 people with average pledges about 40 to 50. Start looking around for other people in your range, and then you should probably lowball it a little bit, because once again, when we talked about whether this would be measurable and actionable, it's better to budget for lower numbers and be responsible about it than it is like, I don't know what these companies were thinking here. That's why I clipped this Tomb Raider thing here, where Tomb Raider sold 3.4 million copies, more copies than any Tomb Raider game ever. This is the 2016 one. And they still said, oh, it didn't meet expectations. It's like, what? Just be realistic about it. Lowball the numbers. So I said I wasn't going to talk to too many failure stories. Here's something that's a little closer to something you might produce. Hey, Griffin, have you ever heard of this? Oh, wait, I got a question here real quick.
Yes, we do have a lessons question.
How does the model preview versus full paid version later, how well does it work? How viable is it? It is an excellent model. Do it. I have had a lot more success when we give people a free quick start version of the rules. That's like 16 to 20 pages. It describes the basic rules and how to play it. And then people go buy the deluxe version later. That's a kind of a mutant version of the 80-20 rule lessons, where if something is free, hundreds or thousands more people will download it for free than would actually buy it. So you can't go by that kind of number there. Sometimes like it's as low as 0.5%. But having something people can look at ahead of time is always better. Same thing with demo models. One thing I've seen is people are going back to the old shareware model with video games, where the basic game is free, but then the soundtrack and the second and third levels are cash out DLC. So people can play it for free and then get the other levels later. Letting people see something early and then getting into it is the shareware model. It's very good. Let's see, Monchopin, hope I'm pronouncing that right, asked, is there a general threshold of exposure you should try to meet before starting a crowdfunding campaign? Are there reliable ways to amplify exposure? We'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the timetable part. The answer is it's not reliable. In fact, I'm going to talk about an unreliable method right now. We'll talk a little bit about exposure in the next part right after this. So I don't want to scare you off. In fact, this is an unreliable one I want to talk about. This is When the Water Tastes Like Wine, which is an indie video game that's developed by some of the people that did Firewatch, my bad, Firewatch. Griffin, did you hear about this game?
No, I didn't. I did hear about Firewatch, and that seemed like it was semi-intriguing, so it's sad to
Right.
hear that they came out with another thing, but didn't succeed.
Okay, because speaking of ways that they didn't promote this video game has Sting as a voice actor in it.
Interesting choice.
Yeah, it's a very interesting choice because it was probably very expensive, but I checked and they didn't get any promotional work out of Sting. So it's great that they hired Sting, but they probably should have put some sort of clause or something to get publicity out of him because it didn't pay off for them. So a little bit there. But when I talk about responsibility, okay, so here's an example of an indie game that's kind of in your category. As near as I can tell from some of my original research, some of this is a little difficult to get because GDPR and that kind of stuff. But from as near as I can tell, When the Water Tastes Like Wine sold about 4,000 units. Maybe they sold more, maybe they sold less. They sell in digital distribution channels for about 1995. So as near as I can tell, they made about $80,000. Okay. Out of that, they probably paid about 25% of that in distribution costs. That's about how much Steam charges, which is where I found the game. And other services often charge about the same, if not more. Then this article that I linked to here said they claim they spent $140,000 on their budget. So if you made $80,000, but you had to pay like $160,000, that means they didn't make any money. So that's why they're talking about this being a commercial disaster. This didn't make its money back. They're also talking about not making their money back in the first 6 weeks, which, as I said earlier, I don't think was a reasonable expectation. Firewatch didn't explode in the first 6 weeks. I don't know why they thought this would, but this is an example of they made a really nice game, $140,000, maybe not unreasonable. I probably wouldn't have hired Sting. I mean, no offense to that kind of choices, but moving 4,000 units is pretty good for a game no one heard of. As an example sort of scale, here's another game I'm more familiar with because I know some of the people are involved with this. This is another computer game in the same kind of vein, a visual novel type game with multiple paths. This one sold fewer units, as near as I can tell, when I did the review, back when I could see numbers by this. They only moved about 2,300 units in their initial sale run, but after distribution costs, I know their budget because I saw their Kickstarter, and their Kickstarter got $15,467. Let's assume that was their budget. They wound up, in the green because they controlled their costs, did a visual novel that also no one heard of, and even though they had lower sales number than When the Water Tastes Like Wine, their more responsible budget means they made more money. So your goal when you're going to go ahead and set up your project is, while it would be nice to aim to get lots and lots of units, you need to pick a number that's responsible for how many you might sell. You might sell 2,000, 1,000, 500, that sort of number, and then set a pricing range on that after all of your other costs, you can still break even or be slightly profitable. I'm always going to recommend lowball this kind of stuff. Don't look and see, oh, they had 1 million people who pledged for 7th Sea, so I can do that. You're not going to do as well as that. Go ahead and stay responsible about it. I would rather you make something that's close to your dreams, maybe not as nice as you like, really expensive, but you don't want to kill yourself making this, because if you do, if you make it too expensive, you're going to be stressed out, and you're not going to want to sell this. You're going to burn out. You're going to be one of those people. Don't be one of those people who burns out on the Kickstarter who says, oh guys, I'm too stressed to deliver this or whatever. Okay, so, all right. Still got more shot on this question. I promise I will answer them. So that's why I said how much you're going to charge. The answer is more than you think you should. A lot of you will think, maybe I want to make my game cheap. I don't want to charge too much money. No, charge more. You're the one who's going to have to sell all of this. So round up. If you think the game might sell for $30, sell it for $35 or $39.99. There's going to be things that go wrong. There's going to be profit margin problems. There's going to be ones that they get damaged. Charge slightly more than you think you're going to. And also, when it comes time to how many units of this are you actually going to sell, the answer is probably less than you think you're going to. So when we get to the budgeting part, raise the price a little bit, lower the number of units, and we'll go ahead and find that. Wait, does that say what I think it? Oh, sorry. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and set our sales goal, which is how many units we think we can sell. We'll go ahead and make a budget based off of that. And then there'll be a margin in there where we can actually go ahead and make some money. Okay. Everybody's still pretty good so far. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, we'll go ahead and put some text links to this in the chat before we're done. So hang around a little bit because I think I didn't actually get the text file done. If you have a QR code reader, contracts. I could do an entire separate panel on contracting. And maybe if we have time after this, which we might, I can go ahead and talk about that. Contracts are a social agreement between you and your other people that you're involved with. We have a sample contract that we have in our Google Docs. You can find this on sanguinegames.com and at this link here, where we have a sample contract with a gazillion annotations in it that describe a variety of contracts. Hiring people to write, hiring people for art, hiring people for coding, hiring people by the hour, hiring them for a specific goal, indemnity to make sure that they're not stealing anything and you're not asking them to do anything illegal. All of those kinds of visual deals. Disclaimer, I am not a lawyer. The contract that I have has not been reviewed by a lawyer in more than 20 years because we keep amending it because technology keeps changing. Some people ask me, would they use a contract that hasn't been reviewed by, reviewed by a lawyer? Hey, feel free. We'll talk about getting a lawyer. Give them a couple $100 to go ahead and review each one of your contracts if you want. A written contract doesn't have to be reviewed by a lawyer. The important thing is it's the deal between you and the talent. It specifies what your freelancers are supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it. See that specific measurable on there. They'll say, I need, if you're making that box game, I need 30 pieces of card art made to these dimensions that to be delivered by, the July date, so I can get them pre-pressed by August, so I can send them to the printer overseas by September, so they can show up 6 months later in March. They we can get a big talk about milestones, that sort of thing, but a contract is a sub-genre of this. Setting up contracts can be very difficult, so I have an example contract that we can go ahead and review. Yeah, and wow, we're making some good time here. No new questions. Griffin, you have any questions?
I think I may have had one rattling around in my head, but it's dropped off the face of the earth now, unfortunately.
Okay, well, we'll revisit this in a bit. We're actually making pretty good time.
We addressed Ivy's question eventually, didn't we? Which was the accessing the higher market by charging more.
Yeah, we're going to do a big wrap up here where we do a whole budget here. So yeah, and if it doesn't get addressed, we'll go ahead and ask it again. Okay, because the last thing we're mentioning is, of course, timetable. I can go through this pretty quickly.
We do have a new question.
Oh, we do. What's up?
Percival says, how much should I expect to pay for commissioned art?
Okay, that is all over the place. And you may have seen some really goofy questions about what's your budget and what's your art. You're going to wind up, if it's color, like artwork quality that you see in those box games, those start at a few $100s and go up from there. You might be able to work with some, ArtStation has been very good to us. Gunship Revolution is a studio that's been very good to us. I worked with Questron Studios a while ago. Those are studios that you tell them what you need and they act as middlemen to artists. So there might be a slight markup, but they can find artists for you. Honestly, if you want to find out how much they're going to charge, ask them. It's a good idea. Yeah, Ivy is saying $100 to $300 for high quality portraits. And then if you want backgrounds, it gets more expensive the more detail that you need. You want Magic the Gathering style card art, that's going to be several $100s. I think Heather Bruton, who works with us, charges about $1,000 for some of those more detailed pictures. Also, you can work with amateurs. That's why I mentioned the contract earlier. You can call random people up the internet and say, hey, I saw your own, I know you're an amateur. I would like to hire you to do artwork for us. And then you can go ahead and, if you do, don't do this verbally, show them a contract. Some amateurs might get spooked by the contract and say, I don't know if I feel good enough to do professional work, or I don't understand this contract. If that's so, be nice and polite and say, we understand, we thought we would ask. Always be nice and polite to random people on the internet. Professionals will usually look at your contract and tell you specifically what they will charge for specific things. We did a artwork for Vital Hearts with Kelly Turnbull, who works in the animation industry. They worked on Ugly Americans and Ben 10 and that kind of stuff. And they just flat out told us. Or Andrew Dickman, who's working on Looney Tunes, just boom, boom, boom. He gave us very specific rates and we paid for them. Sometimes it might be worth your while to, when we talked about like using social networks and that sort of thing, some artists are better at hyping your stuff than others. I know when Atrox, who did artwork for Skullgirls, worked on our Mad Cat game, which was also cartoon themed. They were very nice about helping promote that. So we got some crossover the Skullgirls audiences a little bit. You like cartoon people beating each other up? How about cartoon people beating each other up in the theater of the mind? And that can help a little bit with some of your publicity and networking. Don't usually expect that though. Like I pointed out with the Sting problem there, it was good that they got Sting and that probably added value to the product, but since Sting didn't promote it and nobody really knew about it, it didn't really help. Monchoban asks, is there a way to tell a minimum how much art you're going to need for a role-playing game manual? That's a good, yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I talked to Kevin Simbito once. You know who that is, right? You know who that is, right, Griffin?
I'm terrible with names is my answer.
That's the Riffs guy.
Wow.
Everybody, you may say a lot of things about Riffs, but damn, does Riffs have good art. My bit of advice for a tabletop book is I don't like to have a 2-page spread that doesn't have any artwork in it. That's my personal rule. So that means that you have to have at least a 1/4 page or 6-page picture for every 2 pages of your book. So if your book is 200 pages, you can divide that by 2 for 100 spreads, and then you need to cover at least 6 pages worth of artwork. So that's about 16 full pages worth of artwork, and a page is about 2,500 pixels by 3,300 pixels. Not all artists charge by the size, they'll charge by details. But yeah, so basic rule of thumb is take your page count and divide that by like, divide that by 2, and that's how many illustrations you need. And then divide, and you might not want full page illustrations, divide that more. You don't necessarily have to have a picture every 2-page spread. I mean, that's a perfect world. Some role-playing games like D&D get away with a lot less. And also this gets into premium versus economy. If you do your page placement pretty good, you might be able to get away with 4 or 5 really, really nice full page ones in between the chapters. Also, it's a question of pricing versus economy. A lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse games and other immediate games that we've been seeing, people don't necessarily expect those to have very high production level artwork. They often expect them to have black and white artwork or maybe no artwork or clip art. So those games, when people buy those, are not necessarily expecting them to have a lot of artwork. And sometimes you'll meet people who even prefer that a book doesn't have any artwork. The historical people that I've met, if they're, we did ages ago, we did Dutchman, Switzer, Spaniard, Swede, which was a war game for a very specific war in the 30 Years' War. We sold all 500 copies, but it was for a very specific market. And for that one, we just did a couple clip art pictures. So I hope that kind of answers the question. Basically, short answer, divide the page count by 2. And yeah, as Ivy said, you're going to get what you pay for. Soliciting amateurs who on ArtStation or on YouTube or that sort, not YouTube, on Twitter and that sort of place, people who haven't done professional work before, they might be able to work for a little less because they haven't made a name for themselves, but you do have to pay them. Find out how much they want and then pay them that money. Don't insult people by offering exposure. Not only is no one buying that, but also when you send them the contract, you can't pay someone exposure because no money changed hands, so it's not binding. And Ivy pointing up, DeviantArt still plays. ArtStation.com, I think, is the place to go now. I think it's got a better professional, but DeviantArt works too. Just make sure that when you hire people that you have a contract with them. The sample contract that we linked to earlier will specify that you have rights to reproduce the artwork and that sort of thing. If you just call up a random person to get them to draw your D&D character, like people say we're doing D&D portraits, if the contract doesn't specifically say you have the rights to reproduce this in the book, you don't actually have those rights. That's what we meant by responsible. You can't just buy a picture from someone and then put it in the book. You have to ask the author for that right. Some artists will raise their rates if they expect you to put it in a printed book later on and sell it for money. That's fine. Just negotiate terms. And if an artist wants a lot of money, when we talked about spending money to make money way earlier, you're going to need some seed art to start your campaign, so you have something to put in the Kickstarter pitch for people to look at so they'll know that you're serious. So you might have to wind up spending a couple $100 there to get some really nice artwork there. And then once you budgeted that, you'll know if you want to get 20 times as much, you'll know how much it's going to cost. Lesson says you have to cover the rights to the product or all future products. The contract that we put in there will specify, you have to specify what you're allowed to put it in. Like if you're allowed to put it in Ironclaw First Edition, you have to go to a separate contract for Ironclaw Second Edition. You could, in theory, do a contract that says we get unlimited reproduction rights to this forever. That's part of what I mentioned about treating everybody right. A lot of people aren't necessarily going to agree to that, but you can negotiate that. Sometimes artists will say yes, they may be cool with it. Other artists might say yes, but charge you more money. Yep, anyway, so that doesn't cover other tie-in books. In other words, yeah, definitely when we did our Usagi Yojimbo role-playing game, we licensed that from Stan Sakai, and our contract is extremely specific and says we're only allowed to make tabletop role-playing games, and then the contract went on to define what a tabletop role-playing game was. So we don't compete with computer games in any way, cell phone games, box games, board games, nothing. We are only allowed a specific tabletop game. Okay, yeah, some spirited debate here. All right, so, and we can get back to this a little bit later, but I did want to talk about deadlines. Remember I mentioned earlier that I think you all, I mean, I'm not necessarily sure what you're working on, but I would love to see your idea. But in order for me to see your idea, like your product, it actually has to exist. So the nice part about setting deadlines and timetabling things is now we know when it's supposed to come out. I linked here to NanoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month. That's where in November, you're supposed to take 30 days to write a 50,000 word novel. It's okay if you don't meet that, or if you just write a bunch of words. The purpose behind it is it's a structure. It's write a novel. We define what a novel is. We measured it as 50,000 words, and we have a timetable here when it's supposed to actually be done. Whether you finish it or not, the point of the exercise here is it's got a structure. We'll know when you're done. So do it. Don't feel really bad if you're an indie person and you miss deadlines. There are companies that miss deadlines. Hey, Griffin, ever heard of these guys?
Sure have.
Yeah. Was a link. Oh, and wait, I remember this game, Undertale. Oh my God, look, they were a year late. They must have disappeared out of nowhere. No one's ever heard of them ever again.
Yep, definitely never hearing from that product ever again.
Yeah, Undertale is my poster child for slow burn, guys. In fact, also speaking of slow burn, hey, look at this. It's the My Little Pony fan game that turned into its own product. Remember I said earlier that it's probably better to shed a license and just create your own thing? Wasn't this in the news recently?
Was it? I don't know. I remember when the kerfuffle was happening that it was definitely a couple of articles about having to change from the license to something independent like this.
No, the news is this game has started showing up in fighting tournaments because Fightin' Herds is based on the Skullgirls engine, and the Skullgirls engine has some of the best netcode.
That's right. They have the best netcode, and they're showing up, everyone.
Right. So remember, this is a game that they prototyped in 2015 or so, Kickstartered for a deadline for 2017, Didn't come out till 2018, and now here it is 2020, and it's in the news again for stuff. That's what I meant earlier when I talked about long tail. If you're an indie person, you know, you may not be the top, might not be on the top of the pyramid, but if you just, wait it out, you can often get in there. So that's why we talk about like long tail production. Most of your crowdfundings you're going to do, you should be able to get them done in about 180 days. Possibly a bit longer if you're doing a box game, because after you get the box game together, you might have to send that overseas, and there is often a 90 to 180 day turnaround on overseas stuff. So it might be a little bit longer. Okay. So after your crowdfunding finishes, you might be able to go ahead, and after 180 days after the crowdfunding is done, you might be able to get your product out. Then after that, it's going to be, you can see here, I've got a long tail progression here where, remember I said the Pareto principle of 20%. You'll, 30 days after release, because of your Kickstarter, you will probably sell a lot of the stuff. Now, they mentioned earlier when we talked about video games and stuff, all the movie guys and the blockbuster guys are always saying, no, we got to get everything in the first 2 weeks. If we're a failure in the first 6 weeks, no one will ever remember us. I just showed you a bunch of examples of other indie darlings. You're in this for the cult classic. Now, that does mean that if you look at this, we're looking at 720 days on this timeline here, where my products, I predict that within 2 years, we will have met their full sales goal. So I'm anticipating that we sell 20% of our product after the Kickstarter, and then 2 years later, we're supposed to have sold 4 to 5 times as much. Does that always happen? No, but that's the plan. But everything's gravy train for me, because I did my Kickstarter responsibly, where I could meet all of my stuff. So when the Kickstarter came out, I was already in the green. All of these sales numbers after it is just more money trickling in slowly over time and over to networks. While the product, time moves on, ages a bit. It's a video game. It's not going to age all that well. And if it's warehoused product, we have to pay to have it warehoused for a while. But after 2 years, then we decide as the product made enough money or if we kill it or not. So a lot of you, like I said, you're not going to make a big splash. I don't want you to think that you're going to make the product boom, and then after the Kickstarter is it, that's it, we're done. You're going to have to put 2, 3, or 4 years. Well, I'm suggesting you should put 2, 3, or 4 years of your life into committing for the product over the long haul. It doesn't have to consume your soul. That's why I said we need to make sure it stays in the green, so you're not getting stressed out. It's like you made your money, but now every few days you ask yourself, hey, how's this doing? Check out the Amazon Prime numbers. Update the EPUB to have a better standard in it. Check the metrics, that sort of thing. Maybe go promote it at a convention or something like that. You can stay reasonably chill and promote it. Just keep in mind that it's going to be something you're going to commit to. So that's why I want to make sure it's something that you feel good about, that you were responsible about, so all the contracts are there, and that it's already in the green, so you don't have to, you're not stressed out and starting to do things so you want to make more money. Okay. Let's see. I was going to look see if there's questions here. Yep. Oh, good stuff in the chat. Yeah, they still make choose your own adventure books. They call them visual novels now. They're actually a growth sector.
Right, but I think that was in response to categorizing something earlier. And
yeah. There we go. Okay, so the reason why we have to have our timetable here, where we're talking about how long we're going to commit to it, this gets into Ivy's question about marketing. Okay, because not only do we have to make a big splash when we're doing the crowdfunding, but if you're going to be selling this for another 2 to 3 years after that, you have to continue to inform people about it. So marketing is a tricky thing, and I'm certainly not an expert at it. And honestly, you can pay other people who will then tell you they're not experts about it. But marketing for you usually means a couple different venues. First of all, there's the obvious place, which is social media. I'm going to recommend that when you set up your company, you set up separate social media for your product. You can always retweet it on your own personal social media, but it's okay to set up like a dummy Twitter or a dummy Facebook account that's nothing but your product so people can talk about it. That way they're not crossing over and that sort of thing. Social media is reasonably cheap. but not free. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Normally, I'd say you should go to conventions. Nah, it's been a bad year for conventions, hasn't it?
Sure has.
Look for local conventions in your area. They'll often have an artist's alley or something else as an entry level for dealers. It's worth your while to go to a local con that's only 500 people, because often the tables there will only be $30 or $40. And if it's local to you, you're just driving to show up. You can also demo your game at conventions. Places like Origins and Gen Con will let you, sign up to host a game, and people will show up with tickets to play it. I know MagFest has specific indie track where they'll let you get a table at MagFest and show off your indie video game, and you don't have to pay for the table. You do have to bring a bunch of computers and mess with software, and that's its own adventure, but hey, that's a great deal if you can get it. Going to convention tours is almost always your best bet as an indie person, because you get to meet people and talk to them, and running panels and events gets people. So it's really good. Advertising is a really thorny bit these days. You can pay for ads on things like Google AdSense. I've done that. Usually it will require a credit card. I would recommend getting a credit card if you're going into this kind of business. Some banks will give you a very nice debit card rate, or let you open up a separate business account. With places like Google, you have to tell them how much you're willing to spend, and make sure you say that, because Google can charge you hundreds of dollars per minute, where they'll just broadcast it. It goes out to a bunch of machines, and then waits till after you reach your cap. They wait for you to come back and authorize more money. Advertising is a lot more difficult than it used to be. We used to be able to hire things like Project Wonderful, or go to individual websites to advertise. Nowadays, advertising is a lot more consolidated. For an indie person like you, you're probably going to do a lot of word of mouth and advertising on social media. One thing I do want to talk about is the rise of third-party clients like BackerKit and some other companies. Also, when you start a Kickstarter, you'll start to get the spam. You will immediately start to get people who say, hey, we can help you reach new markets. Unfortunately, what a lot of these guys want to do is they want to do the other three things we just mentioned: social media, conventions, and advertising. But they want to do it for you at a fee. BackerKit's fees start at something like 15%. For the advertising part, start at 15% of your entire Kickstarter game, which is wow. And they start at that. They actually go up from there. I calculated they could be as high as 40% or more of your entire. Imagine getting 10,000 for your Kickstarter and then just handing over 4,000 of it to BackerKit before you even start it. Anything else? These guys are promising. They'll promise you there are a lot of upsells. It's really weird though, because the fine print is they never guarantee anything better than buying Google ads. And I'll tell you right now, these companies are buying Google ads. I've worked with other companies. What they just do is they just take your money. They prep an ad a little bit, and then just go ahead and buy a Google ad with it anyway. You could have gone to Google AdSense. It's on google.com, and just bought the ad yourself and eliminated their fees. Is it worth it? Usually on online advertising, you'll for paid advertising, about 5% of the people who see it will actually click on the ad to come look at your thing. That's called a click through. Then sometimes they might actually buy it, which is way less. The real trick is that, are you getting a good return on investment? If I spent $200 on advertising, did I get $200 worth of traffic of people buying my stuff? The ads themselves are usually pretty cheap. They run about, for a couple $100, you get millions of people seeing your ad. So if only some of them come and buy it, you'll get a good return. One thing I didn't talk about on here are influencers. There's a lot of people on YouTube and that kind of stuff who would do unboxing videos or would talk about a game. The sad truth is those guys are all paid. Nowadays they require them to verbally tell you that they got paid to do that. They used to just put it in what was called a doobly-doo or not say it at all. Maybe sometimes if they really like something, they'll do it. But honestly, if you're sending them free stuff, there's hundreds of other people sending them free stuff. So the odds of you, maybe if you knew these guys personally, maybe they might hype you. But honestly, the influencers make money by getting paid. When they say, I was paid to show you Doom Eternal today, that means the ZeniMax, Bethesda, paid them thousands of dollars to talk about the video game. If you don't have hundreds to thousands of dollars, you're not going to get an influencer show. I hate, to give you the dope of that, but you might be able to get on your friend's Twitch stream, sending copies of your video game to Twitch. Ractus, the Ractus company, and I stream our games online, and we do demonstrations at conventions. But yeah, getting influencers cost money. That said, some of them are very upfront about their prices. You can just write to them, ask how much does it cost, and they'll tell you. I'm hoping that answers Ivy's question. Yeah, Percival, I hate to be. Ivy asks, how does the ROI from influencers compare versus classic ads? It's harder to tell with the influencers. The problem with the influencers is that people watch their video, okay, and then the influencer maybe knows how much their count was, and then I have to look to see if I had any kinds of sales spike. I'm an angry indie guy who, as I mentioned earlier, I'm in this for the long haul. I'm expecting that word of mouth will creep up, and after 2 or 3 years. The few influencers I've hired, I think they did have a positive impact. But I got to be honest here, since they will cost you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, if you're a first-time publisher, I can't really recommend that you spend 10% or more of your entire budget on an influencer. The other problem is you will have to coordinate influence. Remember I said about advertising? If you're going to do a Kickstarter campaign and you're going to be an influencer show, that means you would have to get several hundred or $1,000 beforehand, get a working prototype available, organize with the influencer to be airing on this specific date during your Kickstarter with a link. And while many influencers will do that, they'll charge more for it. So since this is for beginners, and that is an exercise that takes a lot of organizing, several $1,000s, my advice is take $200 or $300 and buy a bunch of advertising on Google AdSense. Once again, make sure you cap it. I saw better returns by buying Google ads than I did for any of these other ones. The one exception to that is, I'm going to tip my hand here, fur affinity ads give a great return on everything we've ever advertised, even if it wasn't furry. I'm just going to say that once. Okay, so I had some notes in here about third-party upselling. If you do make a deal with somebody like BackerKit or CrowdOx, they can also help you with the fulfillment issue of it. These are a little weird. Technically, when you do a Kickstarter, after the Kickstarter is over, you have the option of sending a survey to everybody who backed it to ask them some personal questions. These guys like CrowdOx or BackerKit will do the survey for you. Except a couple problems. They'll charge you money for it, usually about 7% of your budget, or CrowdOx does 5%, but they also do a per transaction fee. So one of those. And honestly, this is also something that you could do yourself. The Kickstarter will let you fill out a survey and will give you a database. If you're not, and you could probably spend a couple $100 to get somebody to massage the database for you. The other nice thing about the third-party people who help you, they'll often have a shopping cart to upsell people later. I don't know if you've ever backed anything that was on BackerKit or anything like that, but they continually send emails to people telling them, hey, did you really like Lancer? Would you like to buy more stuff in the Lancer line? And then BackerKit takes a cut of those extra sales and forwards them on to you. That can also be helpful. But as I mentioned, these guys cost a lot of money. And one thing I'm becoming increasingly aware of is they're also kind of violating, I don't want to say violating privacy. They're collecting personal data on your backers. So they are increasing the amount of spam that they're getting. So I know some people who worked with them and swear that it was worth it. But when we get to the budgeting part, because these guys take 5 to 7 to 15% or more of the funding, that's going to eat into your budget. Okay, 20% furry working for you. Yeah, so I wish I could have answered Ivy's question about influencer. I would recommend classic ads. Also, speaking of classic ads, this is a personal issue to me about social media. You stop showing up on social media when you get too popular. I want to thank Wondermark.com for sharing this with us. So if you're like, this is a post that was on Wondermark, and after about 100 or so people see it, it stops showing up in people's feeds. And then David Melke here gets a note saying, hey, if you want to show up on more feeds for $10, we'll let you show up on 200 more feeds. So Twitter and Facebook and the like are algorithming you. You're not crazy. You're not showing up on their feeds. Twitter or Facebook will contact you. Like if you sign up with an email for Twitter, you'll get Twitter for Business ads, and Facebook has these right on their page. After you're too popular, they will ask you for more money. I haven't paid Facebook any money because I haven't had a Facebook post get this popular. David Balke tells me he occasionally does it, especially as something to advertise, because he sees positive returns on it. But I just wanted to warn you that getting the Twitter or the Facebook account or whatever isn't the panacea you think it is. You will have to pay attention to the actual business side of things because you will stop appearing. The odds of you going viral, I wish I had better answers for you. I don't know what the odds are of going viral because I can see that they will throttle you after a certain point and shake you down for money. So that said, my advice is, yes, take out ads, but really what you're depending on is you're depending on the Kickstarter to grow awareness for things. That original there, and then word of mouth after the product gets out. And it's who mentioned this in the was it Lessons we asked for that? Freebies and downloads that people can download at no cost to see previews of your product also help. Okay, so all that chat about getting all that together, let's go ahead and talk about numbers. Okay, so we have to, now that we've gone ahead and figured out that we're gonna, make a thing, what the thing is, how to treat everybody, and what schedule we have to do it on. Now we have to figure out, okay, how are we going to sell this? We've got our fixed costs where we're gonna have to pay for some artwork up front. We have to find out if there's gonna be any fees that the crowdfunder wants. And I know I have this under fixed costs, but honestly, the crowdfunder fees are going to be a percentage of your entire haul. So they're going to be like 20 or 30%. Or something like that. Kickstarter takes at least 11%, and there's more on top of that. Per unit cost, how much are your materials going to cost per unit that you're going to set up? If you have to distribute it, how much is the distributor going to take? Somebody like Steam or Amazon takes 25 to 50%, even though they're digital. Digital distributors usually take more, whereas stores that distribute it will usually take 30 to 40. You have to make room for profit. You are a for-profit individual. Unless you're starting a non-profit 501c6 company to do this, you are going to have to put a little more money in there to go ahead and just a little bit higher that margin to make money. And then we're going to have to decide how many of these that we're going to sell. Once we can answer all of these questions, we can go ahead and decide how much money to ask for in our Kickstarter. The pieces of the pie, each one of these take up vary slightly a little bit. But once we figured out what all of those are, we can then figure out our total budget, because we know the fixed costs of the artwork and writing that we have to hire, and then we can figure out how much the parts and stuff cost per unit. And so that gives us our goal right there. Oops, I lost the chat. Any questions so far? Is it a good idea to release a full, if rough, free version of your game if you plan to crowdfund a premium version later down the line? Manchapan, I would have to say the answer is yes. People seeing very often that is a good way to develop word of mouth, where you do the Kickstarter, and I had updating very, very early, where we said updating was an option for a Kickstarter, where you could just say, hey, did all of you enjoy Aura Battler Tylenol, the draft version? we'd really like to do a much better version with better artwork, deluxe, and in stores. Would you kickstart that? And yeah, and also you'd have some more information about how many units you would sell, because you would have already have done the free version, and you'd see how many people actually went ahead and downloaded those. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that. Okay, so we have a bunch of scary numbers right here, and it's like, oh wow, how are we going to put all this together? I have some good news for you. We already did it for you. You can go to sanguinegames.com to look up some of this stuff, but we have a Google Sheet with annotations that has little boxes that you can enter. Well, you can't actually enter on our sheet. You have to go to File and choose Make a Copy. But after you've made a copy, then you can go ahead and change all of these numbers and go ahead and plug in different ones for your product. Each one of these categories is going to be slightly different. I'm going to go through this part pretty quickly because I usually do this as question and answer sections. But this is where we start looking. What we're looking at here is, what is our average reward going to be, and make it. Like, for example, let's say we wanted to make that family game. Okay. We want to make that family game and we want to sell it to people. Well, no one's ever heard of us, but how many of these should we sell? Well, let's just pick a number, 3,000. I think we could probably sell 3,000, maybe in a Kickstarter. I've seen other board game Kickstarters get 3,000 people. So maybe we could do that. And then, like I said, it has to have a certain level of production. So let's go ahead and shoot for $39.95 would be what people would be paying for. We would plug these into the spreadsheet, and then we would make notes here of how the materials would cost, the talent, the markup. This is an example you can go ahead and plug into the spreadsheet. Notice that this one is designed for stores. Retail stores are going to want to sell your product at the wholesale rate. So if your game is for stores, you're going to have to go for that overseas production to do a huge run of 3,000 to get the per unit down, so you can sell them to the retail stores at only something like 45 to 35% of the retail cost. Now, this is an example of the same type of thing, but now we've decided that for our Kickstarter, maybe we're going to go ahead and make selling to stores a stretch goal. Instead, I want to sell 3,000 units directly to people. And specifically, I want to use crowdfunding to do it. Okay, so now, because the distributor isn't, now retail markup is no longer like a part of the question. But notice the yellow sliver is there, where the crowdfunder is going to want to take 10% of this or so. Okay, so now we can still do this as a big markup, but now notice that the distribution cost has fallen upon us. Out of 3,000 units at $40, we've said maybe about 45% of that, you plug that in the spreadsheet. We have to spend several $1,000s. We're going to have to pay custom fees. We're going to have to get a warehouse. And then after we do the Kickstarter, we're going to have to ship it to people. But let's see. Yeah, it's the same budget, but notice the profit sliver on this got much bigger. So the profit sliver on this, because we're not paying the distributor, the sliver's bigger. Maybe we could go ahead and lower those numbers. 3,000 sounds like a lot for a game no one's ever heard of. What if we could get it down to $20 per pledge and only made 1,000 of these units? Could we still make it profitable? We start plugging those numbers in. Lower budget with a lower per unit cost is more actionable for us and more responsible because it's not overwhelming. So you can sit here and play with the spreadsheet a little bit and plug in different numbers. And of course, put in zeros for stuff that doesn't apply to you. Like, for example, if you're making a video game for digital distribution, obviously we don't have to pay for, postage and that sort of thing. So, okay, let's see what we've got here. Ivy says, I've had a lot of early success showing off the full rules, even in Google Docs. Yep. Often little drafts like that. I've known people who have used social media stuff like Patreon, where they would go ahead and show off stuff to backers or to the public and drafting that sort of thing. People can go ahead and see it. And that does build word of mouth by proving that I can make a thing And then when you do your Kickstarter, throwing some money at it to get yourself some seed art and a good presentation, you can go ahead and show them you're serious. They know your thing already works. You just want to see it better. So yeah, good thinking, everybody here. Okay, so I have a bunch of these slides here that I use. We're asking about things. I'm gonna go ahead and skip through these because we can't really ask questions. Okay, so a couple things that we want to go ahead and wrap up. We talked about a lot of things here and offered a lot of links here. I've just got a couple little odds and ends that don't necessarily fit anywhere. But I do want to say that thanks everybody for coming to the show. I believe in you. Whatever your dream is, turning it into a reality that other people can enjoy, it's not always easy, but it can be very rewarding. Also, just as a reminder, remember, getting the Kickstarter money is not the success. Delivering what you made with the Kickstarter is success. Sometimes people get the money and then it kind of goes to their head, or they spend it on other things, or they get distracted. It might not be the easiest, but plan for it, and I believe you can do it. It might take a little extra work. Maybe you need to get some more people involved. It's going to be a lot of work, but you can go ahead and do it. Little bits of advice to go ahead and make stuff. Sharing your product early with people is good for that good old quality assurance. Make sure that when you get the products, you get them shipped to you so you can check them out. If you're going to work with overseas people, ask for recommendations, ask for samples, that sort of thing. This probably isn't going to happen to you. Get the business card of a lawyer, family lawyer, bird lawyer, whatever sort of field it is. It doesn't really matter as long as they're an accredited attorney. I don't know about the bird lawyer thing. You don't necessarily have to pay them a retainer. If anyone ever calls you and says, hey, you ripped off my game that you've never heard of that I was planning to do, but I never actually made a Kickstarter, or your idea is too similar to mine. This doesn't happen as much as it used to be, but every now and then people will threaten, my dad's a lawyer, I'm going to sue you. You just copy the information off of the card, say, this is my representation, send that off to the people, and then block them and never talk to them again. If someone threatens you with any legal type action, take them seriously and then block them and shut them down. They will only talk to you through legal rep. Most of the time, this stops the person forever. They just want to make noise and complain about it. If they actually did call the lawyer would then call you and said, I understand, I'm representing you. That's almost definitely not going to happen to you, but you definitely don't want the opposite. If somebody threatens you with legal action or makes a big stink about it on social media, okay, and you don't shut them down immediately by saying, here's my representation, talk to that, this can turn into a big spat and a big public array, and you can get involved in this big tar pit of arguing with people. No, don't do that. If your idea is unique to you, I've had people come to complain that we licensed stuff like Usagi, and they were going to license Usagi, so they're mad at us for licensing Usagi. It's like, dude, you could have called them. Whatever. Don't get involved. Just, you've got plenty to do. I already talked about making sure you treat everybody right. You guys all strike me as people who are above board. Don't promise. If you're going to promise people revenue share later, like we're not going to pay you now, but we're going to pay you on a percentage later, get that in the contract. Our sample contract will have specify when those numbers show up, how much they get paid, and on what schedule, and then do that. Make sure, but most artists and writers are going to want money up front. So you're someone no one's ever heard of. I have an established company, so people are more willing to do revenue share with me because I have an existing library that I'm selling. Is a random person off the street, you probably won't be able to do that. Or you might have business partners, you want to do revenue share with them. Treat everybody right. Now, my advice is always get it in a contract. Don't think, oh, I'll just do it verbally and we'll be fine. People forget or misinterpret. You guys are probably gamers. You play box games that have a rule book in them. The contract is your rule book. Also, I mentioned, please don't lowball stuff because you think the rules of Kickstarter say that you have to set the numbers low or you won't meet your goals. If anything, always put your goals slightly higher than you need. And extra money, stuff will go wrong. Plus, also your mental health is important. If you're on a string every time and with no extra buffer zone or anything like that, you'll stress yourself out and it won't be worth it. This is a funny thing to say in 2020. Having an emergency fund on the side so you can go ahead and pay for things you have to bail stuff out. I'm going to recommend, once again, set the Kickstarter budget a little extra higher so you can have some extra money. You might want to put that in the budget just in case something goes wrong. Okay, I've got some links here. These are sites that may be able to help you. Amazon.com runs a, Ivy has a question. What's the best way to find and connect the physical game stores for distribution? Well, that's a good question. Amazon, who I just mentioned here, has a special warehousing program that they'll sell directly to customers. But the way it is like the rent is reasonable for 5 months, and after 6 months, it becomes unreasonable. I work with a third party known as Studio 2, but there's also RDI that's out there. The best way I would have said would have been to go to the Gen Con indie show and talk to distributors there. Right now, distribution wasn't that great before, and now that the pandemic is happening, Diamond, I may have heard this in the news, Diamond is one of the big distributors of both comics and board games, and Diamond's having a spat with DC Comics right now about carrying their line. So, my advice is you might want to call some warehouses like Studio 2 or Atlas Games or RDI. There's also, I didn't add this to the list. Well, actually, I don't know why I'm mentioning this. Blackbox.cool is actually direct to consumer, so I'm not really sure why I'm mentioning that. So honestly, I'm lucky enough to have some old school contacts like with Atlas, RDI, and Studio 2 Publishing to represent me. There's also IndieWire. Thank you for reminding me. I think it's IndieWire.com. If it's not IndieWire, write to me later. There's a couple more companies that do distribution. I usually go to the trade shows and pick up their brochures, which is not an option this year because there's not a lot of digital stuff. But they were working with Fate and with 7th Sea to get them in stores. Getting in stores is very difficult. It requires a couple money and expenditures. That's why I'm going to advise for most of you, you would probably make a store your stretch goal and do most of your budgeting direct to consumer if at all possible. Or work with something like maybe Blackbox.cool or Amazon that's mentioned here to have them do warehousing for you and sending it to customers. They'll do it a lot cheaper than some of the other places will. Unfortunately, like this is a black mark against the third-party guys like BackerKit. They don't actually do warehousing or mailing. They just get the information. They don't help you with distribution at all. So they just give you a list and say, off you go. So I also have emyth.com is mentioned on here. Emyth is a great website. I read them when I first started their first business. They have a lot of free stuff on their website, but I recommend their book, The E-Myth Revisited. It's short for the entrepreneur myth. The basic gist of it is the idea was the easy part. Remember all this stuff I mentioned about being specific and measurable and all that kind of stuff? Okay, that stuff was about, breaking down your goal and making it happen. A lot of this stuff is work. And once it becomes work, it might not feel as fun anymore. I believe in you and I believe you can do it. And the E-Myth has a lot of good advice in it on how to keep your spirits up and keep this going. Speaking of business stuff, if you're doing this yourself and you actually make a profit, this is going to have to show up on your taxes. Taxes are a difficult and complicated thing. I often recommend Intuit.com, which those guys who make TurboTax. Is giving freebies or promotions to places like LGS is a good idea? After that's a new one on me. What is an LGS? I'll answer that in a bit. I'll ask Percival's question is, what's the best way to find companies, factories, that makes copies of the board game? I always had the best advice at the Gen Con indie track, but I'm going to go ahead and recommend Pacific Digital, who I've worked with. I don't have their website handy, but there's a lot of places. In fact, also listed on this website here is Print Ninja. Print Ninja are excellent guys to work with. They're on the listing here. They do a lot of different printing options, especially comic books and role-playing games. They were extremely helpful. Print Ninja, they have one of the best tables at Gen Con, and every time I've talked to them, they'll send you materials that describe the printing process and different options. They're extremely helpful. I highly recommend them. Yes, local gaming stores. Giving freebies and promotions to local gaming stores can be very helpful. It's also a little bit on the expensive side because obviously you have to pack the thing up and ship it to them. There is also something called Free Game Day, which is coordinated by some people and is kind of difficult. They basically want you to print several thousand copies of a game and then give it to them to give out, which isn't really an option for low-end people. But you can go ahead and put contact information on your website. I think the best way we were able to reach out with gaming stores is on some of our Kickstarters, we had a reward specifically for a gaming store where we said, if you get this reward, we'll mention your store in our books and send you a wholesale case of our books in advance. I've had some luck with that. That practice has been a little deprecated in modern Kickstarter. It's not against the rules. It was against the rules for a while. They let you do it again, but now it's a little deprecated. So you can actually put a Kickstarter reward in there that says gaming stores for, normally the reward is $20. For $100, we'll sell you an entire case of these at the wholesale rate. Most places won't take you up on that, but some gaming stores will. Also, what gaming stores really want is they want promotional materials. You might want to consider places like Redbubble or other places that make posters. I'm going to have to look to see who makes posters. I'm an old person. We used to make ours through Cafe Press, which I understand there's more modern sites of that. Sending them posters and flyers and other promotional material can be very helpful. It's also kind of expensive. We were using Kickstarter where if a store sent us promotion, by the way, shout out to Noble Knight. You've been one of our backers for many years. We would send them materials. Actually, what's another way when the pandemic ends is to have contact information for people who want to run your game at conventions. We specifically made a quick start rules for the Iron Claw game. And then we would have either we would attend conventions, but if other people were running an Iron Claw event at a convention, we would send them quick start copies of the rules for free. We took them on good faith that they were going to go ahead and run the event. That's one thing you have to worry about. A lot of these people who say they'll promote your stuff are just kind of scamming free copies. Like they'll get the copy and then decide they didn't want to go to the convention anywhere, something like that. That's where, when we mentioned earlier, having a quick start version or something that's a little teaser for your big game, especially in digital format or perhaps like a thin 16 or 32 page book that you can print en masse to send out to people, can be an excellent promotion for that. And of course, you could send those out to the gaming stores. Many of the stores will accept a quick start version for free because it didn't cost them anything. And they'll get you some eyeballs. So those are good ways. Let's see. I suppose we the goal, the free demo. Yeah, and honestly, Griffin just hit the nail on the head. The demo is your promotion material. It's supposed to get people to tease them, to show them what the game is like, and then make them get more. Having demo versions of your product available is good, first of all, to give away for free on the internet so people can try before they buy, but also it gives you something to send out to people, because sending out your full product to people is not a way to get them to buy it for free. Sending out the demonstration version is the way to get them to buy it. Okay, so a couple more pointers up here. LightningSource.com and Lulu.com are printers. They specialize in print on demand, but they also do large scale. You can contact them from their websites. They have lots of information on big scale printing. OneBookshelf.com is the umbrella for drive-through comics, drive-through RPG, drive-through fiction, all of them. We've done business with them for many years. They have a variety of programs to help you work with a variety of freelancers. I mentioned Print Ninja. TheGameCrafter.com is an excellent website for doing prototyping of games. You can often order all the parts separately, but GameCrafter.com will help you set up a game. Their price is going to be ridiculous and the quality isn't going to be very good. So it's going to be like 40, 50, 60 bucks for a game with little pawns. But I would recommend setting your game up there maybe making a few prototypes to send out to people, publicity, and using that as the prototype of your game to gain word of mouth and to see how it physically works. And then you can tweak the rules and go ahead and start selling it as a later version. It's good for prototyping. And the Kimra Mag link that I have up there is just some advice on design. Percival says, how do you promote the demo? You promote the demo the same way you promoted everything. You can put stuff up on, well, Amazon doesn't let you put stuff up for free, but One Bookshelf is more than happy to let you set up things as $0 or pay what you want. So you can have a quick start version of your board game up there. The same for video games. You can sell a demo version for free, like have a 0 point price point. Steam charges $100 per game, but to be honest, if you're making a commercial product, spending $100 to get a demo version and $100 to get a full version up there, that's not that unreasonable. What would make more sense is to have a $100 version of the game for free and then add DLC. The rest of the game is DLC add-ons, which once again, free demo, DLC, solves all of your problems there. You can promote it on social media. You can promote it by taking out advertising. What we mentioned earlier. Once again, if something is free, like if it's a free download, you'll get a lot more people who will download it than will actually get engaged enough. Make sure that when you make your demo that you have ways to upsell people to the full version later. Make sure that the demo includes in it, this is where to get the full version. Advertises, no, the full version has like dozens more monsters and, you know, way more full color art and all that kind of stuff that's in it. Okay, these were good questions. Griffin, you have any questions?
I think kind of building off what some other people were talking about before. So you want things to spread by word of mouth. It sounds like you want to sort of build a community that is willing to start spreading the word of mouth. What's your experience with trying to build that community around your product?
Conventions have been the best for us, although it is the future now. And we've been having some luck with streaming, which we're doing right now. Because people will come by and check it out. Now it's possible to upload YouTube videos to show what a game is like. It used to be that if you got a box game, you had no idea what it was like. A lot of you may have noticed you can just go on YouTube and see a game. So highly recommend that. I do recommend it's a good idea to get a social media presence and be on Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and Tumblr and whatever social media that you want and keep a presence up there. I just warn people it's, you know, with the little reservations, they are doing cash shakedowns. Just keep that in mind. But like I said, it's also for the long haul. It's why I mentioned the timetable type thing. You are not going to explode in your first 2 weeks. In fact, what's more than likely is some obscure person will mention you 6 months later down the line, and you'll have a sudden spike because a bunch of people suddenly heard about you. So that's why I'm recommending don't get discouraged. Set your original Kickstarter goal to keep you in the green. It doesn't have to be hugely profitable, but set it so you just make a little bit of money, and then you can go ahead and promote the product over time and responsibly in a nice low stress way so it won't kill you. And that way you can chat about it. Oh, and of course the last warning I had was you need to keep your professional identity separate from your personal one. Don't be a Philfish. I mean, for many reasons, but that's one. And just, you know, check into those every now and then, promote it, respond to people. Pretty good so far. Let's see. Redeemed name and NPC. I don't know what that means.
That's just a channel feature. While we're fishing for more questions, I'll throw one more out to you. You mentioned Google AdSense for doing advertisements if people are really up for that. Are there other alternatives that are similar to Google AdSense that you would also recommend that aren't the third parties that will just go back to Google?
No. I wish I had a better answer to that.
I know it's a loaded question. I tricked you. It was a deception.
For many years, I used Project Wonderful, and I think there are some pretenders to the ProjectWonderful.com throne. Project Wonderful is run by Ryan North, who you may know as one of the writers of Deadpool, as well as other things. And it was a beautiful website that let us market stuff on multiple websites. But my essay on how the internet has been ruined by consolidation Right now, Google and Facebook are the number one places to order. We used to do a lot of Patreon type stuff, but I've noticed that Patreon has turned away from underwriting and more towards contributing lists, because it used to be the Patreon people would offer space on their website. So no, I don't really have a good answer for that. The only one outlier I've ever seen that is, for some reason, for affinity.net, which for some reason people actually watch ads on there. So, and they're also running Google ads, so I don't even pretend to understand anything. Ivy says Reddit ads are very good because of the targeting. I have not taken out an ad on Reddit yet. We are in the process of migrating our forums. I feel bad about this. We used to run our own forums, but the software is no longer working, so we're migrating that to Reddit. I haven't invested in Reddit ads, but probably Reddit's pretty good about targeting people because they're pretty good about compartmentalizing things. Being accessible on social media is very helpful. If you're selling stuff, you're selling stuff. You need to put your sales face on and address customers directly and talk to them. Some of you have retail experience, so you know what I mean. And I also recommend that for your own stress level, keep your sales face different from your personal face. When those start to over, it means if you use your personal with your business, the two of those will get mixed together, and then you won't be able to run and hide when you're sick of the business stuff. So, and we had some very good informed people here. So, also, we run our website. We have an email address, which I don't know if you can put an email address in the chat. Well, I just did. Feel free to write to us to tell us about your exciting project. We'd love to hear about it. I love seeing indie stuff. Oh, crap. Oops. All right. Yeah, and just let us know about what you're up to, because we love to hear about this stuff. Are we influencers, Griffin?
At this point, probably to some small extent.
All right.
Yeah.
Can't wait to start charging that thousands of dollars.
You got that free advertisement.
Yeah, if you can make good friends with an influencer, but like I said, they're getting requests from hundreds, if not thousands, of people. You're probably my advice is set up your own Twitch channel and debut it. The nice part is about setting up a video and that sort of thing is that a video that you set up that demonstrates your product does last. That's what I meant by long tail. Setting up a video and putting a link to it means that a year or two down the line, someone can look at the video, and by the virtue of the internet, it'll probably be up forever. At least you put it on YouTube or something like that. Have backups. Okay. And Lessons is working on something right now. So everybody go buy Lessons thing. That's about all the time we budgeted for. Stay tuned to sanguinegames.com as we have something new launching next week. Ooh, what could it be?
Mystery. You'll have to come back and find out.
And some of you were here earlier, so you saw in the chat that we were planning some new stuff. So once again, I believe in you. Don't get discouraged. If you do a Kickstarter and it doesn't reach its goal, hooray, you didn't spend years of your life on something that was tearing you apart because it never made any money. I had so many more examples of people getting Kickstarter burnout that I could have talked about. Don't let that happen to you. Budget responsibly. So I guess that wraps it up. Yep. Are there more questions? Thanks for coming.
Doesn't seem to be. But I suppose we're gonna wrap up.
I hope
you got anything else you want to say?
Well, I hope I answered Ivy's question.
I think we did. Yeah. I think we got around to that.
And thanks. We're going to try and do this again in August if Gen Con Online happens and they don't cancel it 72 hours before it's supposed to go live.
Right, in which case, hey, you're always welcome to come back here and do it again.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And let us know what you're up to, because we'd love to hear from you.
Yep, and I'll go ahead and do a quick little bit of shilling here, too. If you guys like tabletop RPGs, which I assume you did because you came here, come watch us on Sundays and Wednesdays. We got a lot of stuff going on. And, hey, Rafferty's even in some of them, too. So if you just can't get enough of him, come on back.
Little secret referees and the best ones.
That's right. We're gonna have VODs. We're gonna see it on YouTube. You'll be able to see this presentation there as well. So go ahead and follow us here on twitchtv.ractus and over on YouTube as well.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for showing up, and that's it. Have a good day.